Captain Morvik's hands shook as he watched his world fall apart. The peaceful morning had turned into a nightmare in minutes. His merchant convoy of 12 ships was now down to 3, and those were barely holding together. The Korthok raiders moved like deadly shadows through space, their black warships cutting through his people's vessels like knives through paper. "Papa, what's happening?" His youngest daughter's voice crackled through the cum from the family quarters below. Her innocent question hit him harder than any weapon could. "Stay down there, little star," he whispered back, trying to keep his voice steady. "Everything will be okay." But nothing was okay. The Zilani were merchants, not warriors. Their ships carried spices, rare metals, and artwork between worlds. They had no weapons beyond basic shields, and a few emergency plasma connectors that couldn't even scratch the raiders' armor. Another explosion lit up the darkness. The cargo ship, carrying his brother's family, just vanished in a ball of fire. Morvik closed his eyes and felt something break inside his chest. These weren't just random attacks anymore. The Korthok were hunting them down one by one, taking their time, enjoying the terror. The bridge around him sparked and smoked. His navigation officer lay unconscious in a pool of blue blood. The young pilot at the controls was crying, her large eyes reflecting the fires outside. They were all going to die here. So far from home. That's when Morvik remembered the old stories. His grandfather used to tell tales about the ancient days, when strange beings called humans walked among the stars. They looked different from every other species. No fur, no scales, just smooth skin and predator eyes. Most aliens feared them, calling them Deathworlders from a planet so dangerous it would kill anything else in days. But the humans had been protectors too. They fought against slavers and pirates, making space safer for everyone. Then, 30 years ago, they just disappeared. Some said the galaxy had grown tired of their violent ways and driven them out. Others believed they had simply died out, as violent species often did. Morvik's grandfather had whispered about emergency beacons, hidden devices the humans left behind before they vanished. If the darkness ever returns, the old Zilani had said, if evil thinks it can prey on the innocent again, the beacons will call them back. Most people thought it was just a story, a fairy tale to help children sleep better at night. But Morvik's ship was old, bought from a scrap dealer decades ago. In the deepest part of its storage bay, covered in dust and forgotten by time, was a small device with strange markings. His grandfather had shown it to him once, making him promise never to use it unless there was no other choice. Today, there was no other choice. Morvik stumbled through the shaking corridors of his dying ship. Behind him, he could hear the Korthok fighters getting closer, their engines screaming like angry beasts. His daughter was still hiding below, probably scared and wondering why her papa wasn't coming to comfort her. He reached the storage bay and found the device exactly where his grandfather had left it. It was small, no bigger than his palm, made of some metal that seemed to drink in light. Strange symbols covered its surface, and in the center was a single red button. His claws trembled as he held it. What if the stories were wrong? What if humans really were extinct? Or worse, what if they came back but were nothing like the protectors in the tales? What if they were just another kind of monster? Outside, another ship exploded. The were getting bolder, coming closer to finish off the survivors. Soon, they would board the remaining vessels and take whoever was left as slaves. Morvik pressed the button. The device hummed to life, its surface suddenly glowing with soft blue light. The symbols began to move, rearranging themselves into new patterns. Then it sang a high, clear note that seemed to cut through space itself, carrying a message farther and faster than any normal transmission could go. As Korthok fighters surrounded his ship, Morvik closed his eyes and prayed to whatever gods might listen. He had just sent humanity's ancient callsign into the dark. Now all he could do was wait and see what answered. Admiral Jake Mitchell was drinking his morning coffee when the alarm changed everything. The sound cut through Luna Base like a knife, sharp, urgent, and completely unexpected. He'd heard that particular tone only once before, during training exercises. It meant one thing: an alien distress beacon had been activated. Mitchell nearly dropped his mug. In his 25 years of military service, he'd never heard that alarm for real. The last time humanity had received an alien distress call, he was still a young lieutenant learning how to pilot fighters around Jupiter's moons. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as officers rushed to their stations. Banks of computers that had been running on standby power for decades suddenly blazed to life, their screens flooding the room with blue light. Systems that most of the younger staff had never seen active were now humming with purpose. "Sir, we're getting a clear signal," called out Lieutenant Danny Cross from the communications station. His voice cracked with excitement and fear. "It's coming from the outer spiral, roughly 47 light-years from here." Commander Beth Park appeared at Mitchell's shoulder, her face pale but determined. She'd been his second in command for 8 years, and he'd never seen her look so serious. "Admiral, the beacon signature matches the old Zilani emergency codes. Merchant vessels under attack." Mitchell's jaw clenched. The Zilani were good people, peaceful traders who'd never hurt anyone. Their ships carried art and spices between worlds, not weapons. If someone was attacking them, it meant the old darkness was spreading again. "What about the attackers?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Energy signatures match Korthok Raider patterns," Park replied. "It's a full battle group, sir. At least 20 ships." The name hit Mitchell like a punch to the gut. The Korthok Ravagers were everything humanity despised: slavers, pirates, and murderers who preyed on the weak. Before humanity's withdrawal from galactic politics, the Death Fleet had fought them dozens of times. The raiders were cunning, brutal, and showed no mercy to civilians. "Sir, orders." Park's fingers hovered over the fleet activation panel, waiting for his decision. Mitchell stared at the tactical display, showing the distant battle. 30 years ago, humanity had been asked to leave galactic politics. The other species had called them too aggressive, too violent, too willing to solve problems with force. They'd said humanity's presence made space more dangerous, not safer, so humanity had withdrawn. They'd pulled back their fleets, closed their embassies, and retreated to the Sol system. The galaxy had celebrated, thinking they'd gotten rid of the dangerous Deathworlders forever, but humanity had never really left. They'd just learned to watch from the shadows. Hidden bases throughout the solar system had monitored alien communications for 3 decades. Secret shipyards in the asteroid belt had continued building warships that officially didn't exist. The Death Fleet had grown larger and deadlier. Even as the galaxy forgot about human military power, Mitchell had always hoped they'd never need to use it. "Wake the Death Fleet," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of years of waiting. "Full mobilization protocol. Send activation codes to all hidden stations." Park's fingers danced across the controls, entering codes that would bring humanity's true military might out of hibernation. Across the solar system, emergency signals reached installations that most people believed were just mining operations or research stations. On Ceres, the massive doors of Shipyard 7 began to open for the first time in 15 years. The Retribution, humanity's newest dreadnought, started warming up engines that could crack moons. Near Pluto, stealth carriers that had been drifting like dead rocks suddenly came alive. Their crews rushing to battle stations they'd drilled on countless times but never used around Saturn's rings. Destroyers emerged from hiding spots within the ice and rock. These weren't the exploration vessels that other species remembered from humanity's diplomatic days. These were weapons of war, built by a species that had evolved on a planet where everything tried to kill them. "Admiral, All stations report ready status, Park announced. Death Fleet standing by for deployment orders. Mitchell nodded slowly, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. Somewhere out there, innocent people were dying while monsters celebrated their victory. The galaxy had wanted humanity to stay away from their problems. Today, they were about to learn that some problems required the monsters humanity could become. Deploy the fleet, Mitchell ordered. Target, outer spiral. Mission, search and destroy. Humanity was going back to war. The Korthok raiders were having the time of their lives. Commander Vask laughed as he watched his warriors strip the last Zolani cargo ship of its valuables. 23 merchant vessels destroyed, hundreds of civilians dead or captured for the slave markets. It had been almost too easy. These softskins never learn, he growled to his bridge crew. They fly through our territory with no weapons, no escorts. They practically beg us to take everything they own. His warriors roared their agreement. The Korthok lived for moments like this, easy prey, valuable cargo, and terror in their enemies' eyes. They'd been raiding merchant convoys for over a decade, and no one had ever been able to stop them. The survivors huddled in the remaining 3 Zilani ships, their vessels barely holding together. Vask could see them through his ship's scanners. Families clinging to each other, probably praying to whatever gods they believed in. Soon, his boarding parties would crack open those ships like nuts and drag everyone inside to the slave pens. Sir, we're detecting some kind of energy buildup, reported his scanner operator, a nervous young Korthok who'd only joined the crew last month. Vask waved dismissively. Probably just their engines failing. These merchant ships fall apart if you look at them wrong. But the energy readings kept climbing. Strange ripples began appearing in space around the battlefield, like heat waves rising from hot metal. The stars themselves seemed to flicker and bend. Commander, this doesn't look normal, the scanner operator insisted, his voice getting higher. With worry, Vask was about to snap at the youngster when reality tore itself apart. Space cracked open like breaking glass, revealing glimpses of somewhere else entirely. Through these impossible wounds in the universe, shapes began to emerge. At first, they looked like shadows, dark outlines against the strange light pouring through the rifts. Then the shadows became solid, and Vask's blood turned to ice. The ships that materialized were unlike anything he'd ever seen, where Korthok vessels were crude and brutal. These newcomers were works of deadly art, their hulls curved like the bodies of hunting cats. Black metal that seemed to drink in starlight. Weapons sprouted from their surfaces like thorns on a predator. Plant? What are those things? Whispered his weapons officer. Before anyone could answer, the alien ships opened fire. Captain Rex Stone stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the Korthok fleet through cold blue eyes. His ship's artificial intelligence had already calculated firing solutions for every enemy vessel. The battle computer was feeding targeting data to 17 other human warships, coordinating an attack that would be over before the raiders even understood what was happening. All ships, weapons free, Stone commanded. His voice was calm, almost bored. Standard suppression pattern. No survivors on military vessels. The Death Fleet unleashed 30 years of pent-up fury. Human kinetic rounds screamed through space at 90% of light speed. These weren't energy bolts that could be deflected or absorbed. They were chunks of metal, moving so fast, they hit like miniature suns exploding. Korthok's shields, designed to stop plasma beams and particle weapons, simply vanished under the impact. The first raider ship came apart like a toy hit by a sledgehammer. Its hull peeled away in layers, revealing the soft interior where crew members were still trying to figure out what was attacking them. They had maybe 2 seconds to realize they were about to die before the ship's reactor went critical. Vask watched his fleet die around him. Ship after ship exploded in brilliant flashes that lit up the darkness. His own vessel shook as something punched through its armor like it was made of paper. Emergency klaxons screamed warnings that nobody was alive to hear. "Return fire," he screamed, but his weapons officer was already dead, killed when a human round had vaporized half the bridge. The Korthok managed to launch a few desperate plasma bolts at their attackers. The human ships didn't even bother to dodge. Their armor absorbed the alien weapons fire like rain hitting a mountain. In return, the humans launched something that made Vask's warrior heart stop beating. Nuclear fire bloomed between the ships. Not the crude atomic bombs of primitive civilizations, but controlled fusion reactions that turned space itself into a furnace. 3 raider vessels simply ceased to exist, consumed by artificial stars that burned for exactly 4.7 seconds before collapsing into nothing. Captain Stone checked his chronometer. 9 minutes since the engagement began. The Korthok fleet that had terrorized this sector for years was now expanding clouds of glowing gas. "Sir, detecting survivors in the merchant vessels," reported Lieutenant Kelly Brooks from the sensor station. Stone nodded. "Deploy rescue teams. Full medical support." Minutes later, Zalani survivors watched in amazement as human soldiers in powered armor cut through their damaged hulls with surgical precision. These same beings who had just erased 23 warships from existence now worked to save every injured alien they could find. The galaxy had forgotten what humanity could do. Today, they were starting to remember. Retress. The news hit the galaxy like a shockwave. 23 Korthok warships destroyed in 11 minutes by an unknown fleet. At first, most species didn't believe it. The Korthok Ravagers had been the nightmare of civilized space for decades. Their ships were fast, their weapons deadly, and their cruelty legendary. Nobody destroyed entire Korthok fleets and lived to tell about it, but the evidence was impossible to ignore. Wreckage scattered across 3 star systems, energy signatures that matched no known weapons, and most disturbing of all, witness reports from surviving Zilani. Merchants describing ships that looked disturbingly familiar to anyone who remembered the old stories. High Admiral Gorthak received the reports in his fortress on Korthak Prime, the Raiders' home world. The massive alien sat in his command throne, surrounded by the skulls of enemies he'd personally killed over his long career. His scarred face twisted with rage as he read the battle analysis. "Humans," he snarled, crushing the datapad in his claws. The cowards finally crawled out of their hole. His advisors shifted nervously around him. They remembered the old wars, when humanity's death fleet had been the terror of pirate fleets everywhere. But that was 30 years ago. The humans had retreated, vanished, supposedly grown weak and peaceful. "My lord," ventured his intelligence chief, "our sources say humanity withdrew from galactic politics decades ago. Perhaps these are just ships built using old human designs." Korthak's laugh was like grinding metal. "I fought those Death World monsters before they ran away. I know their stench, their tactics, their cold-blooded efficiency. These are humans. And they think one lucky victory makes them dangerous again." He stood from his throne, all 9 feet of scarred muscle and predatory rage. Around the command center, his officers watched with the reverence reserved for legends of violence. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Gorthak commanded. "Full mobilization. Every ship, every warrior, every weapon we have. We're going to remind the galaxy why they begged us to make the humans disappear in the first place." Within hours, the Korthok war machine began to move. From hidden bases throughout the Outer Rim, raider fleets converged on rally points. Massive dreadnoughts emerged from asteroid hideouts where they'd been waiting for exactly this kind of challenge. The Grand Armada hadn't been assembled in over 50 years, not since the humans had first withdrawn from space. 3,000 ships, 60 million warriors, enough firepower to crack planets and burn entire solar systems. Gorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, and felt the old excitement building in his chest. The humans had made their mistake. Now he would show them what happened when prey tried to bite back. the Armada jumped to hyperspace, heading for the last known position of the human fleet. They never made it. Admiral Mitchell's Death Fleet was waiting for them. The battle began in the Nexus system, a strategic crossroads that the Korthok needed to control their territory. Mitchell had chosen the location carefully: asteroid fields that would break up enemy formations, a dying star that interfered with long-range sensors, and gravitational anomalies that would trap any force foolish enough to commit to a full assault. The Korthok arrived, expecting to find a small human fleet hiding behind defensive positions. Instead, they found something that defied every rule of space warfare they understood. Major Kate Rivers led the first wave of the assault from her dropship, watching through the viewports as human engineering rewrote the laws of physics around them. The UES Prometheus had positioned itself near a massive asteroid and was using gravitational field generators to tear chunks of rock free from the surface. But instead of letting them drift in space, the ship was accelerating them to incredible speeds and hurling them at the Korthok fleet like guided missiles. "Holy hell," whispered her sergeant, Tony Martinez, as a piece of rock the size of a city block slammed into a Korthok battlecruiser. The impact vaporized both the asteroid and the ship in a flash of superheated metal. Rivers smiled grimly inside her combat helmet. "That's just the warm-up, Sergeant. Wait until you see what the Devastator is doing." The UES Devastator had taken position near the system's dying red giant star. Using technology that the galaxy had never seen before, the massive human dreadnought was literally weaponizing stellar matter. Streams of plasma, each one hot enough to melt planets, reached out from the star like fingers of destruction. Korthok ships that thought they were safely outside the star's natural reach found themselves consumed by artificial solar flares. But it was the human ground forces that truly broke the Korthok spirit. When Rivers and her Marines finally boarded enemy vessels, they moved with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. They knew exactly where to hit, exactly how to disable alien technology, exactly which corridors would be defended and which would be empty. It was as if they'd been studying Korthok ship designs for decades, learning every weakness and vulnerability, which of course, they had. The Korthok warriors had trained their entire lives for boarding actions in close combat. They were bigger than humans, stronger, and armed with weapons designed to tear through heavy armor. But size and strength meant nothing against enemies who fought like living computers. Human Marines moved through Korthok ships like ghosts, appearing in unexpected places, striking vital systems, and vanishing before the defenders could respond. They turned the raiders' own ship systems against them, flooding sections with poisonous gas, shutting down life support in strategic areas, and even using the ship's artificial gravity to crush defenders against bulkheads. Within 6 hours, the Grand Armada was no more. 3,000 ships had become debris fields and escape pods. High Admiral Gorthak himself was a prisoner, his flagship's command center occupied by humans in power armor who looked at him with the cold indifference of professional exterminators. The news spread through galactic communication networks like wildfire. The mighty Korthok hegemony, terror of the Outer Rim, had been destroyed in a single day by a human fleet that seemed to appear and disappear at will in government buildings across 1,000 worlds. Alien leaders stared at the reports and asked the same terrifying question: if humanity could do this to the Korthok, what could they do to anyone who had supported driving them away 30 years ago? The galaxy was about to find out. Admiral Mitchell stood at the massive viewing window of his flagship, watching the last fires die out on Korthok Prime below. The planet's surface was scarred with the remains of military installations that had been surgically removed from existence. But the cities remained untouched. The civilian population centers showed no damage at all. This hadn't been a war of conquest. It had been an execution. Behind him, his bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, monitoring surrender communications from across the former Korthok territory. In 3 weeks, humanity's death fleet had dismantled an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for generations, not through brute force or overwhelming numbers, but through the kind of precision that only came from decades of careful planning. "Sir, we're receiving surrender documents from the last holdout systems," reported Lieutenant Tom Hayes from the communications station. His young face showed a mixture of pride and disbelief. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a communications officer on a secret base that officially didn't exist. Now he was helping coordinate the surrender of an interstellar empire. Mitchell nodded slowly. Through the viewing window, he could see Korthok civilian transports moving between the planet and his fleet. Not evacuation ships fleeing in terror, but medical vessels and supply runners. The same human marines who had torn through military installations were now distributing food and medical supplies to refugee camps. "Open all channels," Mitchell commanded. "Full spectrum broadcast. I want every government, every news network, every civilian radio on every inhabited world in this galaxy to hear this message." Hayes's fingers danced over his controls. "All channels open, sir. You're broadcasting to approximately 4 billion individual receivers across 6,000 star systems." Mitchell straightened his uniform and looked directly into the recording device. For 30 years, humanity had been silent. Today, they would speak with one voice to the entire galaxy. "This is Admiral Jake Mitchell of the Terran Defense Corps. Speaking for all of humanity," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. 3 weeks ago, the Korthok hegemony made the mistake of attacking innocent civilians under our protection. Today, that empire no longer exists. Across the galaxy, alien leaders leaned forward in their seats. Government officials paused their meetings. Civilians stopped what they were doing to listen to words that would reshape their universe. "But let me be completely clear about humanity's intentions," Mitchell continued. "We did not destroy the Korthok to conquer their territory. We did not wage this war for resources or political power. We fought because innocent people called for help, and we answered." He paused, letting his words sink in across thousands of worlds. "For 3 decades, we withdrew from galactic politics because you told us we were too violent, too aggressive, too willing to solve problems with force. You were right. We are violent. We are aggressive. And when evil threatens the innocent, we will use that violence without hesitation or mercy." On the bridge around him, his officers watched their admiral deliver humanity's ultimatum to the stars. From this moment forward, any species or organization that preys on the defenseless will face the full might of the Terran Death Fleet. We offer our protection to any world, any people, any civilization that needs it. All we ask in return is that you treat others with the same respect you would want for yourselves. The broadcast continued for another 10 minutes, but the message was already clear. Humanity was back, and they were claiming the role of galactic protector, whether anyone wanted them to or not. Within hours, the responses began flooding in. Captain Maria Santos watched from the docking bay of Titan Station as the first refugee ships arrived. Solani merchants whose families had been rescued from Korthok slave pens, civilian populations from a dozen worlds that had been freed when human forces dismantled pirate bases. Even some former Korthok civilians who had lived under their government's brutal rule for generations. "Ma'am, we're getting official requests for protection treaties," reported her aide, Corporal Billy Turner. "The Andromedan Trade Alliance wants to discuss formal defense agreements. The Crystalline Collective is offering to share star charts of known pirate hiding spots." And the HIT paused, checking his datapad again. "The Altarian Republic wants to know if we'd be interested in establishing permanent bases in their territory." Santos smiled. 30 years ago, these same governments had voted to expel humanity from galactic politics. Now they were lining up to ask for human protection. "What about the Galactic Council?" she asked. Turner's expression grew complicated. They're being very careful about their official response. But unofficially, 3 council members have already sent private messages asking about defense consultations. It wasn't surprising. The same politicians who had branded humanity as too dangerous to participate in civilized government now realized they needed those same dangerous humans to keep the peace. But that was fine with Santos. Politicians could debate and argue about proper procedures all they wanted. What mattered was that innocent people were safe. Over the following months, the new order took shape. Human patrol fleets began regular sweeps through known pirate territories. Former Korthok military officers who had committed war crimes found themselves facing human military tribunals. Slavery, which had been a persistent problem in the Outer Rim for centuries, virtually disappeared as human forces systematically dismantled every trafficking network they could find. The Death Fleet had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a military force powerful enough to impose its will on anyone, but disciplined enough to use that power only for protection. Admiral Mitchell returned to Luna Base 6 months after the Korthok War ended. His fleet had grown from 18 ships to over 200, as humanity revealed the true extent of their hidden military buildup. But the mission remained the same: watch, wait, and respond when innocent people needed help. Standing in his old office, looking out at Earth's blue marble, hanging in the darkness, Mitchell allowed himself a small smile. Humanity had tried playing by the galaxy's rules once. They'd been polite, diplomatic, and respectful of other cultures' ways of doing things. The galaxy had told them to leave. Now they were back on their own terms. And this time, nobody was going to ask them to go away. The Death Fleet had work to do.